Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk with you about ACSLPA's new supervision module. And my name is Susan Raffett. I'm Deputy Registrar at ACSLPA, and I'd like to introduce my colleague Renee Phillips, who joined ACSLPA just a few months ago as our new audiology advisor. We will be co-presenting today's webinar. I will just remind folks that we are recording this. I did just say that actually, but the recording will go up on YouTube in a few days. Also, there is a hotline for technical issues. So if you are having any technical issues, you can phone the ACSLPA office at 780-944-1609, extension 102, and we will do our best to help you out. Please feel free to enter any questions that you might have in the chat, or alternatively, you can wait until the end of the presentation to raise questions. I think today I will actually have the ability to see questions, but if I miss any, Paula will jump in and let us know that there are questions coming in. And we'll also, as I said, leave some time at the end for questions as well. So I think we'll move right into the content of the presentation then. So today's learning objectives are to provide a general orientation to our new web-based course on supervised practice for internationally educated applicants. We're also going to share considerations more broadly related to effective supervision and the supervisor-supervisee relationship. And we're going to focus primarily on supervisor accountabilities, such as power dynamics, culturally safe and effective clinical supervision, and learning and supervision styles. These considerations would be relevant to all supervision, irrespective of whether you're supervising students, support personnel, or internationally educated SLPs and audiologists. So we're going to delve into these kind of as the core really of our presentation. And then towards the end, we're going to focus more specifically on some of the considerations related to internationally educated applicants and their supervised practice period. I will mention too that we're focusing more so on the supervisor perspective because as regulated members, we know that you may all be in the position of supervisor. And there are also considerations in the modules that address supervisees, and we'll touch on a few of those, but that's not going to be our primary focus today. So, as I've already mentioned, the content for the webinar is taken from our recently published course, ACSLPA's Supervised Practice Period for Internationally Educated Applicants. We're really excited that this course has come together. It was a bit of a work in progress for some time, and it's great to have it up and available to the membership. To access the course, you can enter from ACSLPA's homepage. You just click on courses in the right-hand top corner of your screen, and you'll see it listed as one of 3 courses that are available. There are 3 drop-down menus. The first is about tools to access the course. The second is about the course content, and the third includes tips to navigate the course. And then the course content itself is also divided into 3 sections. There's information on the background on supervised practice period for internationals. There's strategies for supervisors, and then there's strategies for supervisees. And it's pretty user-friendly and self-explanatory, I would say. If you only want to focus on one particular area of content, then you can certainly do that. So that's just kind of a bit of how to orient yourselves to the course when you do go on our website. And I'm now going to turn it over to Renee to talk a little bit about some of the accountabilities.
Okay, so now we'll look at some of the key considerations for supervisors. As Susan mentioned, these will apply to all professionals, so that includes support personnel, students, and also those international applicants. Firstly, power dynamics. Power dynamics and power imbalances are a key component of the supervisory relationship. It is the capacity and ability to direct or influence behaviour or events. And in the supervisory relationship, power is naturally imbalanced, where the supervisor is the one who holds greater power. This is because the supervisor may have greater authority or influence in the workplace, and they also have influence over the supervisee's progression through the supervised practice period. Additionally, the position of power can shape the interactions and expectations and even confidence of the supervisee. For example, just being fearful that providing honest feedback to their supervisor may compromise a positive evaluation. Their perception of a power dynamic could also be influenced by their culture. For example, cultures that place a larger emphasis on deference and respect in hierarchical relationships. So just considering how the supervisee may perceive or be impacted by the power imbalance is key. In view of those points, while the power imbalance cannot be entirely eliminated, it's important to strive to create a fair and supportive environment. However, there will be times or situations where the supervisor will need to assert their authority. For example, if the supervisor feels there was a risk to the client, or they need to report an adverse event or professional conduct concern, whether that be to ACSLPA or to one's manager or employer. Here, we've highlighted some practical suggestions or tips that could be implemented into your supervisory practice. These relate to aiming to reducing the impact of that power imbalance, which we've just spoken about. So moving to number 2, offering a comprehensive planned orientation can help create that welcoming environment. Some examples might include outlining communication methods, punctuality expectations, and norms for shared spaces. Help the supervisee feel free to ask questions with multiple avenues of being able to do so, such as not only at organised meetings, but in emails, chat systems, and on the fly. Be encouraging of active participation within the supervisory relationship, because modelling that kind of transparency can help shape shape a more balanced and productive learning environment for them. Number 4, being clear and about expectations and responsibilities is important, because your supervisee may not necessarily be aware of what you consider a norm. By being specific about your expectations, you can reduce any ambiguity. For example, explaining to the supervisee that they don't have to wait for you to let them know before they go ahead with starting to write reports, just so they have that reassurance and clarity. Invite the supervisee's evaluation of your supervision style and process, and then also just be mindful of how and when you deliver your feedback. Cultural safety is another consideration in the supervisory relationship. ACSLPA's guideline on anti-racist service provision is a key resource in discussing cultural safety. While it's quite a dense document, we'd encourage you to review it, particularly page 25, which has a section specific to cultural safety in the context of supervision. This slide is an overview and probably a review for most people of some of the components and their associated definitions that contribute to cultural safety. So achieving cultural safety involves practicing cultural humility, which is the self-reflection on one's own assumptions, beliefs, and personal and systemic biases, and situated practice, which involves examining one's own identity and where it's situated in relation to dominant culture in society. These help foster an understanding and respect that other cultures have different ways of seeing and doing. And just a reminder that the dominant culture in Canada and Alberta is white, middle class, Christian, and cisgender. Culturally safe supervision is part of the supervisor's role, and supervisors are, like all regulated members, responsible for adhering to the standards of practice and code of ethics, which reflect diversity, inclusivity, and equity. In particular, culturally safe supervision involves awareness of the following. So the lack of diversity represented within the professions, differences between workplace culture in Canada, as well as how interpersonal communication norms differ cross-culturally, such as showing emotions, interacting in groups, being assertive, definitions of personal space, and also formalities when interacting with new people. Other points to be aware of are differences in cultural experiences. For example, being located rurally may mean different exposure than working in more urban areas. An awareness of the challenges of evaluating a supervisee's performance through the lens of a dominant culture and dominant culture norms, and their potential realities in society. So the added stresses of power, privilege, and systemic racism in society. Importantly, sometimes you may have to repeat information and or encourage the style of interaction that you're looking for, as it may not be inherent for the individual. We've already covered key aspects of culturally safe supervision in the presentation and its importance for supervisors and health professionals more generally. In practice, however, finding the right balance between implementing these practices and navigating a dominant cultural environment in Canada can be a challenge. Really, our goal today is to raise awareness and provide guidance on the relevant considerations for supervisors. We've tried to draw on some practical suggestions related to supervision and cultural responsiveness from the guideline and also the course, which are listed on this slide. I'll add that you can refer to the multicultural supervision inventory section in the course or resource, which is a resource intended to evaluate the quality of multicultural supervision from the perspective of a supervisee. And lastly, it's important to highlight here that cultural humility does take time to develop. So hopefully you can take away at least a few of the points to consider more consciously in your practice as a supervisor. And I'll pass over to Susan, who will discuss learning and supervision styles next.
Great, thank you. So another consideration that we felt was important to mention, as Renee said, was the whole area of learning and supervision styles. And on the left side of this slide, you see elements of a supervisory style that might be considered more learner-focused, whereas on the right-hand side, you see a more expert-focused approach. I'm not going to read all of the bullet points, but I think you will get the idea as you review that both the learner-focused and the expert-focused bullet points. I can hear some banging in the background. I hope that that's not coming through on the webinar. My apologies. It seems to be something that's happening outside of my space here today. I just wanted to say that I think it's fair to say that in most Canadian contexts, we veer toward a learner-focused approach. And that can be a challenging thing to navigate, or a difference, I guess, to navigate sometimes. So I think it's important to discuss and to get a sense of where your supervisee falls on the spectrum of learner-focused versus expert-focused, and to be clear about what the expectations of your workplace and what your expectations as a supervisor are. You might need to talk this through more than once, as Renee said, and be clear about what your expectations are. And we'll move to the next slide. Kind of gets into this in a little more depth. As I said, understanding where the supervisor and supervisee fall on a continuum of being a more learner-focused versus expert-focused style can prevent misunderstandings and misinterpretations and even conflicts. So I'm going to walk through this slide in a little more detail because I think it's important. You can see on the left-hand side that a more learner-focused supervisor may perceive an expert-focused supervisee as someone who might lack motivation to learn. For example, they might be reluctant to provide a professional opinion that might be different from their supervisors because they don't want to challenge that power hierarchy. the learner-focused supervisor might assume that the expert-focused supervisee lacks initiative or requires micromanagement because they're less willing to just kind of take initiative because they want to make sure that their supervisor is okay with everything that they do. And the supervisor who's more learner-focused might think that an expert-focused supervisee has poorer critical thinking skills because they are, unwilling to ask questions because they're afraid they might look, in quotes, stupid, for lack of a better word, or they might feel it's disrespectful to ask questions of their supervisor. So you can see how these differing styles can result in a bit of a mismatch. And then on the right-hand side, by contrast, a more expert-focused supervisee may view a learner-focused supervisor as lacking professional knowledge because the supervisor is asking them for their opinion. And if they're expert-focused, they're thinking, well, the supervisor should already know those things. Why are they asking me? The expert-focused supervisee might view a learner-focused supervisor as behaving unprofessionally because they're using, for instance, plain language instead of expert vocabulary. And they could even consider the expert or the learner-focused supervisor as a poor teacher because they are not providing all the answers, but they're seeking those answers to come from the supervisee. So, these are all things that require careful navigation. And I think, again, it comes back to that open and honest conversation about learning and supervisory styles, preferences, what's kind of typical in the environment where you work, checking in with one another. How are you both feeling about how these interactions are going? What do you need to do to change and to improve? And then this next slide talks a little bit about supervisor accountabilities in relation to helping supervisees understand about client and family-centered care approaches versus expert-focused approaches to intervention. So this slide contrasts a client or family-centered approach with an expert-focused approach. And here you can see there might be differences in the application of a biopsychosocial model, which is more on the client and family-centered side, where the weight of influence of family and a collaborative approach is the focus, versus what's known as a biomedical model on the right-hand side, which is more expert-focused, where the patient or client does what the doctor or other healthcare professional decides. And again, I would say in Canada, we've definitely veered more towards that client and family-centered approach. And so open conversations about these different approaches to intervention can go a long way to clarifying expectations.
Okay, so moving on to ACSLPA's supervised practice period for internationally educated applicants now. At the point of the supervised practice period, it's important to be aware that an applicant has already completed all the registration requirements in order to be completing that supervision. So they've submitted their application package, which was assessed by the registration committee and deemed equivalent to the Canadian equivalency framework, which is used by ACSLPA. And they've also successfully passed an entry to practice exam. For the internationally educated applicants, the supervised period is 450 hours for all. That's despite clinical practice background, and the period equates to around 12 weeks or 3 months of full-time work. It is also something that can be extended upon recommendation by a supervisor if it's indicated, and then that would be part of an ongoing communication between the supervisor and ACSLPA in completing the mid and final term reviews that occur. So why a supervised practice period? The purpose is to ensure and confirm that the international applicant has the knowledge and skills required to practice their profession in the province. while also having access to direct support. So that's in the form of a supervisor who is intended to assist them in becoming successful independent practitioners. So ultimately, it aims to benefit both the supervisee, but also the broader community. Of course, the supervision period also helps ACSLPA meet its mandate for public protection. And this supportive aspect encompasses things like hands-on experience with a designated professional in their field, developing an understanding of Alberta's healthcare framework and legislation, as well as building professional connections and networks locally and more widely, all of which contribute to the individual's competence to practice independently and experience success. Importantly, keep in mind that supervision of an international applicant or professional is not the same as supervising a student. That's because we assume international applicants already have those competencies to do the job, as they've met ACSLPA's equivalency requirements we just touched on, and typically have experience in the field, just in another country. Obviously, there will be some variability between individuals, but that's why it's important, as Susan has touched on, to have a discussion in terms of what the situation is for the individual and determine how much direct or indirect supervision will be required for them.
I think it's important to, Renee, I was just going to mention on that slide, I think it's important to just mention that, the supervised practice, we assume these folks are coming in and they know what they're doing. They've got the background we expect. But it is a check, right? It is a check on competence. And when supervisors are evaluating these folks at the midterm and the final, they are actually looking at the national competencies that we have in place across the country for SLPs and audiologists. And so they're kind of doing a confirmation that these individuals are meeting those expectations. Just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. And in terms of the level of supervision, ACSLPA leaves that up to the supervisor and supervisee to determine, but the online supervision course offers a suggested progression through the different stages of supervision. We've spoke a lot to these points, so I won't go through them as it's quite clear, but you can find other guidance as well in the supervised practice agreement. And as we've mentioned along the way, it's important to establish this early on in the supervision. We've included just a couple of frequently asked questions on this slide, which relate to internationally educated applicants. So can anyone registered with ACSLPA be a supervisor? There are specific requirements that need to be met to be a supervisor in this situation, which you can see listed on the slide. If you're needing further information on that, you can also refer to that supervised practice agreement plan. And can supervision occur remotely? This isn't something typically allowed, although if someone required some virtual supervision from within Alberta, we have allowed it on a case-by-case basis. For example, the supervising professional typically works in a different clinic to the supervisee in those situations. They may plan to set up direct observation in the same location for some, and they may schedule some observation remotely or virtually. But again, that's on a case-by-case basis as well.
Okay, my turn again. Just to say this slide just provides a list of some resources that you might find helpful. Some of these are included in the supervision course on the website, and some of them relate to specific standards of practice relevant to the presentation. So specifically, we have a standard on clinical supervision, and we also have standard on human resources management. There's also a standard specific to supervision in relation to restricted activities for those of you who are involved in restricted activities. And I believe that Renee also already spoke about the multicultural supervision inventory, so I won't go there. So love to open it up to questions, comments from you. Alternatively, of course, if you have individual questions, you can always contact us via the Contact Us link on the website. Okay, well, I'm sure people are already dropping off. Feel free to sign off. If you have other questions, happy to respond. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.